Welcome to Echoes of the Past, where history isn't just old, it's oddly fascinating.
From forgotten facts to bizarre backstories, we dig into the dusty corners of time
So
so
you
you
don't
don't
have
have
to.
to.
I'm Jody Lynn, your amateur historian and full-time trivia hoarder.
And I'm Efrain, here for the facts and the fun.
Now let's rewind the clock and press play on the past. Now, I do want to say, before we dive in, let's have a quick disclaimer. This episode contains discussions about organized crime, including violence, murder, extortion, and other sensitive topics related to the history of the American mob or mafia. While we aim to approach the subject with respect and historical accuracy, please note that this content may not be suitable for all listeners. We are not glorifying or endorsing the actions of any criminal organizations. Our goal is to explore the impact and legacy of the mob through a historical and cultural lens. Listener discretion is advised. So let's set the scene here. To kick off the episode, we're going to introduce you to the concept of organized crime, not as a chaotic mess of criminals, but as a calculated business-like structure operating in the shadows. We'll explain that organized crime refers to syndicates or networks of criminals who collaborate systematically to profit from illegal activities, gambling, drugs, racketeering, extortion, and more. In America, this structure mirrored cooperations like hierarchies, rules, territory control, and even internal discipline. The American mob, often called the Mafia or La Cosa Nostra, our thing, rose to dominate this world. And the mob, it wasn't just about crime. It was about empire building, violence, and silent power that reached from dark alleyways to the halls of politics. Picture this: 1920s New York. The streets are alive with jazz, flappers, and bootleg liquor. But in the shadows, a different kind of power is rising. Organized, ruthless, and about to change America forever. So, without giving up too much in the front, let's talk about three big hitters. You've got Al Capone, which was the face of the Prohibition-era crime in Chicago. You've got Charles Lucky Luciano, the architect of the modern American Mafia. And then the five families, the infamous crime families that carved up New York. But they also, funny enough, tie into a lot of our pulp culture. So these big names have romanticized the mob as a family business in The Godfather in 1972, and again in 1990 with The Goodfellas, which exposed the chaotic, violent reality beneath the glamour. Of course, you've also got the Boardwalk Empire from 2010 to 2014, which blended the real history with fictional drama, showing the rise of organized crime during Prohibition.
We've all seen mob movies, the suits, the loyalty, the codes, but how much of that was real and how much of it was just Hollywood? That's what we're here to find out.
And of course, to understand how the mob grew so powerfully, we've got to go back before the Prohibition parties and Tommy guns to the immigrant neighborhoods of New York and Chicago, because long before Al Capone made headlines, something dark was already taking root in the alleyways and tenements. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, America saw a wave of immigrants from southern Italy and Sicily. Many settled in crowded tenement neighborhoods of cities like New York, Chicago, and New Orleans. They faced poverty, discrimination, and limited job prospects. In these tight-knit communities, many Italian immigrants brought with them old-world structures of loyalty, protection, and self-governance. In Sicily, organizations like the Mafia weren't just criminal. They were a form of underground justice and protection where the state was ineffective or corrupt. Those customs were adapted to American soil. This wasn't organized crime as we know it yet. It was mutual aid, protection, sometimes violence, but more personal, more local.
When you've got no police who care, no jobs that'll take your name, and a landlord who speaks a different language, what do? You turn to your own.
One of the earliest signs of structured crime in America's Italian communities was the Black Hand. This wasn't a single organization, but a method of extortion. Criminals would send threatening letters marked with a black handprint to wealthy or vulnerable individuals, demanding money or else. What organization in Bethesda games does that remind you of?
The Raiders, the Raiders, the Gunners,
The Assassins, the Brotherhood.
No.
You don't think it? You don't
In
think
the Brotherhood of Steel, they kind of just they show up. They're like, "Ooh, toaster," and then that's about it. Sure, they try to get like supplies and stuff from the local settlements, but they don't come over fucking gun in your face, be like, give me your shit. Give me that toaster.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
See, I was thinking more of along the lines of the assassins in
Skyrim.
Yes, thank you. And Oblivion. With the Black Hand and their own League of Justice and
Well, they're just assassins for hire. I wouldn't say they're for justice. You literally go around murdering people and they give you
because
money.
people ask you to.
Yeah, and they give you money for it.
Do you think they're doing it as a non-profit organization?
No. But there's a difference between what they're doing and fucking doing a ritual, summoning an assassin to go kill an old lady because she was mean.
Mean to the children's.
Compared to this, where they're just like, give me your money.
Give me your
before
money.
I fucking pop you in the kneecap.
Send you to sleep with the fishes.
Exactly.
This tactic terrorized Italian neighborhoods from New York to Pittsburgh to New Orleans. Even opera singer Enrico Caruso was threatened. Often, those who refused to pay were bombed, shot, or kidnapped. The Black Hand planted the seeds of fear and power, but it was chaotic and uncoordinated. What followed was a move towards structure.
At the Black Hand was a stick up in a back alley. What came next was a business plan. Early crime syndicates take shape. As immigrant neighborhoods grew, so did opportunity for both honest work and criminal enterprise. By the 1910s and the 1920s, gangs began taking over illegal gambling, prostitution, and loan sharking operations. But more importantly, they began to organize. In New York, small Italian gangs controlled blocks and boroughs, clashing with Jewish and Irish gangs. In Chicago, a young Johnny Torrio started building a business empire, later bringing in Al Capone. In New Orleans, believed to be the home of America's first mafia family, organized crime had already infiltrated politics and law enforcement by the early 1900s.
So what started as neighborhood rackets were quickly becoming well-oiled machines. Territory, loyalty, and profit, the holy trinity of what would soon be the American Mafia. By the early 1920s, these groups had built the foundations of power, but they needed fuel. That fuel came in the form of a single sweeping national law that would change everything. Prohibition.
And all it took was one law to supercharge the underworld, one amendment to light the fuse.
And boom, just like that, the mob was in business. So up next, the booze flows, bullets fly, and names like Al Capone, Bugs Moran, and Dutch Schultz became household legends. Welcome to the Roaring 20s mob style. So let's talk about the catalyst where, of course, prohibition changes everything. In the 1920s, the 18th Amendment went into effect, launching the Prohibition era. The sale, production, and transportation of alcohol became illegal, but rather than curbing vice, it opened the floodgates for one of the greatest criminal business opportunities in American history. Overnight, demand for alcohol surged, and the only ones willing to supply it were organized crime syndicates. Bootlegging became the new gold rush.
You know, Mountain Dew was a term for moonshine.
Yes.
During that time. Yeah.
And that's why all these little kids are addicted to it now.
That, and that's all the sugar they throw into it. Suddenly, booze was worth its weight in bullets, and the guys who knew how to smuggle, bribe, and intimidate, they were about to get very rich. Bootlegging empires and speakeasies, organized crimes quickly seized control of alcohol smuggling routes, production facilities, and underground bars. These weren't just dive bars; many were glamorous secret nightclubs that catered to high society, all protected by bribed police and violent enforcers. In cities like Chicago, Detroit, and New York, the mob ran entire distribution networks, smuggling from Canada, producing moonshine, and controlling clubs. Corruption in law enforcement and local politics made it easy to thrive.
It wasn't just gangsters pouring drinks, it was judges drinking them. The most iconic gangster of this era was Al Capone. After taking over Johnny Torrio's operations, Capone built an empire in Chicago that pulled in an estimated $100 million per year from booze, gambling, and prostitution. He probably hoped it was $1 billion. But Capone wasn't just a businessman, he was ruthless. His enemies vanished, his rivals were gunned down, and his reach extended into the mayor's office. He was adored by some, feared by most, and investigated constantly by the feds. The peak of his infamy, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929, when 7 members of a rival gang were executed in cold blood.
Capone wore silk suits, dined at the best restaurants, and gave to charity. But make no mistake, he ruled Chicago with a Tommy gun.
With so much money on the line, turf wars erupted. In New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia, rival gangs fought for control. Drive-by shootings, bombings, and assassinations became routine. New York saw the rising figures like Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky consolidate power. Detroit's Purple Gang dominated the Great Lakes liquor stores, or liquor routes, and in Chicago, Capone's outfit clashed with Bugs Moran's North Side Gang in a series of bloody encounters. The violence wasn't just about territory, it was about evolving into a national enterprise. The most powerful gangsters were the ones who could organize and survive.
In 1933, the 21st Amendment repealed prohibition. The party was over, or was it? Rather than collapse, organized crime shifted. The smartest mobsters had already begun expanding into other rackets: gambling, labor unions, drugs, and infiltrating legitimate business. This is when the mob became more corporate, more strategic, and a lot harder to stop.
Prohibition was the crucible that forged the American mob, but its end didn't stop the fire. It simply changed where the smoke went.
The street gangs had learned how to make millions. Now it was time to build a government of their own, not on Capitol Hill, but in smoky back rooms and blood-signed packs.
Up next, how Lucky Luciano helped create a boardroom for the underworld and how the mob became an empire. So, we're moving from street crews to a criminal congress. By the early 1930s, the American mob was flush with money, but riddled with chaos. The old school bosses, known as Mustache Pete's, clung to outdated traditions and refused to work with non Italians. This created rifts, inefficiency, and bloodshed. Enter Charles Lucky Luciano, a young, ambitious gangster who believed in a more modern approach. He envisioned an organized crime system that ran like a corporate board: no unnecessary violence, cooperation across ethnic lines, and structured leadership. In 1931, Luciano orchestrated the murders of 2 of the most powerful old school bosses, Joe the Boss Massieri and Salvatore Maranzano. This ended the Castellamaris War, sorry if I'm saying these wrong, a bloody power struggle in New York, and cleared the path for a new order. Luciano didn't just kill the old bosses, he killed the old ways. And in their place, he built something bigger, smarter, and far more dangerous.
After the dust settled, Luciano created the Commission, a governing body of the most powerful mafia families across the country. Its purpose: resolve disputes, divide territory, and prevent destructive turf wars that hurt business. Its key founding members were Luciano from New York, Meyer Lansky, his financial advisor and liaison with the Jewish syndicates, Frank Costello, a political fixer, Al Capone's Chicago outfit, and the 5 families of New York: Gambino, Genovese, Luchese, Bonanno, and Colombo. The commission wasn't just symbolic, it functioned like a shadow government for the criminal underworld.
Before we move on, how many of these names that we have already talked about have you heard of?
Luciano, I mean, everyone's heard of Al Capone.
Yeah.
You would think I would know some of these because I did a project about the mob in my senior year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
But it was more talking about the more infamous ones than like the whole
thing,
the whole political structure they got going on here.
So most of these I've heard of here and there. Bonanno really stands out for me lately. Morbid did a whole episode about not really about the Bonanno family, but they come into the story quite a bit when they were talking about the casinos and the casino being ran in Las Vegas and Nevada in general, because of all the bodies being brought up from the lake as it dried up, and knowing that the Bonannos frequently ran that area. And the Bonannos have also been linked to, or tried to be linked to, a lot of serial killer killings in that same area.
Mm-hmm.
Which is fascinating because before that, I had never heard of the Bonanno family. But these other ones, like Gambino, Genovese, all of these, I've pretty much heard of them in one way or another. Have you watched The Godfather and The Goodfellas?
No.
Have you seen parts of them at all?
Yes.
So you kind of know.
For The Godfather, the only scene I recognize is the older man in the chair, and he says, "Look at how they massacred my boy," because the internet turned that into a meme.
Yeah, they did.
And then the Goodfellas, I think I've seen. He's got like that the fatter guy who's kind of balding on top, talks with an accent. And yeah, I've seen clips for it on YouTube and shit.
So I've not watched either of them. I've
Blasphemy.
wanted to. I know. I've wanted to. It's just they're such long movies, and you've watched me. I don't sit still for movies for shit unless they're brand new movies. And then good luck anyways, but I've wanted to, and I've seen quite a few clips. But my favorite is the accent that they always give mobsters and mafia people. That real like in the jaw
stereotype
yes,
Italian.
I love it. And I love how well they get the actors and actresses to do it. Especially even if it's not like the serious ones, like for instance The Godfather and the Goodfellas. But like the less serious ones like Gangsters, which I believe came out in 2015. It's got a lot of like newer names to it. It's a really good movie if you haven't seen it. But Scarlett Johansson's in it, I think. It's either her or the girl that's in Zombieland. One of those two. I always get them mixed up. But anyways, what movies, gangster and mob and mafia wise, have you seen that you can? I know Medea does one.
Like next to nothing, really.
Really?
Yeah, I mean most of I've seen about the mobs through media and like school is one for like history class, because whenever they do the Roaring Twenties, you have bringing up the mob families. That's kind of part of it. And then you got the game series, the Mafia series, and I've played all three of them, and then the one remake.
Yeah.
So that's literally all the experience I have for the mob.
That's
through
fair.
Media.
That's very fair. I have always been very fascinated, and I think a lot of people are, with how the gangsters of, like the 20s and the 30s kind of came about, and just how well they operated, even with as much corruption as they had,
Yeah.
And it's always very fascinating to go back and read a lot of this. Like there was a book that I read, cannot remember what it was, but it went through and talked about very specific players in the mob and mafia, which I don't know what the difference in the name is.
I don't think
I always
really
call them
is.
the mob and the mobsters because it just sounds more romanticized to me. If there is a difference, somebody comment on this video, or not this video, this podcast, and let me know, because I would like to know. Google just tells me it's the same thing. But there was a book, and it was really interesting because it went into more of like the personal lives of the big players. And for instance, like the well-known couple, Bonnie and Clyde, and then all of their people. And it really hit on more the personal levels than the overall what everybody kind of knows about them, which I found really, really interesting.
Yeah, but it seems like Bonnie and Clyde were more like just a gang than they were a crime family.
That is very true. But the people they hung out with, that's where you kind of get into more of like the mob and the mafia side of things. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So an important point that we were just talking about was this was the moment that the American Mafia truly became organized crime. No more street level chaos. Now it was about the rules, votes, strategy, and money.
Picture a mafia boardroom with crime bosses in suits instead of hitmen in alleys. That was the commission, and for decades it worked.
Now we're going to move into the 5 families of New York. The commission formalized the 5 families that would dominate New York's criminal landscape for the next century. Each family had its own hierarchy. The boss, the underboss, the consigliere, advisor, the capos, the captains, and the soldiers. This structure allowed for expansion into labor unions, construction, gambling, extortion, and loan sharking, all while shielding the top brass from exposure. five families weren't just gangs, they were dynasties, each with its own seat at the table and each with its own empire to run. Now, going from the five families, let's move into the national syndicate, the cross-ethnic cooperation. Luciano and his close associate Meyer Lansky were visionaries. They partnered with Jewish gangsters like Bugsy Siegel and Dutch Schultz to form what became known as the National Crime Syndicate, a loose alliance of Italian, Jewish, and Irish criminal organizations working together across the country. This cooperation extended mob influence from coast to coast. Gambling operations in Las Vegas, narcotic smuggling from overseas, labor union infiltration like the Teamsters, and control of the docks, trucking, and even Hollywood unions.
Crime just didn't go national, it went corporate. And like any good corporation, it had subsidiaries everywhere.
With the bosses united and the boardroom set, the mob set its sights on new frontiers: Vegas, unions, politics, and a whole lot of money laundering.
Up next, how organized crime went from running speakeasies to running cities, and how the mob became embedded in the very bones of America.
But I do want to say, before we go on to that part, I do want to introduce our sponsor that we have now partnered with. Do you seem to be drinking a lot of caffeine? Do you get the jitters? Do you feel like your heart is going to bust out of your spine or your rib cage? Well, we got a product for you. It's called Dubby. And we are thrilled to announce that Echoes of the Past is now proudly sponsored by Dubby, the energy drink brand that's rewriting the rules and taking on big energy, one jitter-free sip at a time. Dubby started from humble beginnings in a small apartment fueled by one mission: be better. Their founder, Anthony, was tired of energy drinks full of sugar, artificial dyes, and harsh crashes, so he created something different. This has no sugar, no artificial colors or dyes, no calories, no jitters, and no crash, and comes in 15 or more delicious custom-made flavors. So whether you're recording a podcast, diving into a history rabbit hole, or just getting through the day, Dubby's got your back. So if you want to go to www.dubby.gg/discount/echoes of the past, you can get 10% off of your entire order, and let us know what your favorite flavor is. I think, honestly, my favorite flavor is going to be the Dragonade. It looks amazing. It is dragon fruit lemonade. Like, how can you go wrong with that? It sounds so good.
We'll have to order it to try it.
Heck yeah, I want to order all of them. That might be a little bit much. Okay, so let's work our way into unions, Vegas, politics, and the mob machine. First, the infiltration of labor unions. So one of the mob's most lucrative and powerful moves was infiltrating America's labor unions. These organizations controlled entire industries: shipping, trucking, construction, and the mafia quickly realized that control over unions meant control over millions of dollars. They used intimidation, bribery, and strategic placements of their associates in leadership roles. The most famous example? The International Brotherhood of Teamsters, led by Jimmy Hoffa, whose connections with the mafia were deep and well documented. If you can control the dock workers, you can control the docks. If you controlled the docks, you controlled the entire damn city.
There's a little bit of quick trivia. The mob extorted companies by threatening labor strikes unless they paid protection, and union pensions funds were used to fund mob-owned construction and even casino development. The rise of Las Vegas and casino skimming. Las Vegas was the mob's crown jewel starting in the 40s. Mobsters like Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky saw Vegas not as just a desert outpost, but a money-making paradise. Bugsy helped build the Flamingo, one of the first luxury casinos, but after massive costs, overruns, and suspicious of embezzlement, Siegel was assassinated in 1947. Still, the vision lived on.
I'm just going to say I've stayed in the Flamingo. It is nice and massive, so huge you will get lost trying to get to your fucking room. Excuse my language, but you will. Those hallways are so long and twisting that I went up to the wrong elevator twice. 2 different elevators, mind you, to get to my room. And I still did not get to my room. Yeah. Okay, continue. Sorry.
I've never been to Vegas.
We're going to Vegas.
You got Vegas money? Because I don't.
Yeah, I will figure it out.
Over the next 2 decades, the mob quietly built and controlled numerous casinos, using them to launder money and skim profits before they were ever reported. The skim meant millions in tax-free cash funneled directly to the families. Las Vegas was the perfect front. Glitzy on the outside, gangster run on the inside.
Interesting fact, most of the early Vegas casinos were funded with loans from the Teamsters Pension Fund, with help from connected union bosses. So, if you like gambling in Las Vegas, say a little thanks of prayer to the early mobsters. Just saying. Maybe be careful doing that, but do it anyways. They'll probably appreciate it. You might win something. So, throughout the 40s and 50s, the mob expanded its grip on local politics and law enforcement. Judges, city council members, police chiefs, all could be bought or bullied. This wasn't just a city problem, though. It reached Washington. Some senators were accused of having ties to crime families. The McClellan Committee from 1957 to 59 exposed widespread mafia control of labor unions and political figures. J. Edgar Hoover famously denied the existence of the mafia for years. Some say to avoid political backlash, others suggested darker reasons. The mob didn't have to run for office. They just bought the people who did. For years, moving into the Appalachian Meeting, which is where the mafia was confirmed, for years, federal agencies denied that the mafia even existed as a national entity. That changed in 1957. In the small town of Appalachian, New York, over 60 top mob figures from across the U.S. gathered at the home of gangster Joseph Barbara. The meeting was intended to settle disputes, elect new leadership, and discuss business, but state troopers caught wind and raided the event. Dozens of mobsters were caught fleeing into the woods in suits and expensive shoes. It was the first time law enforcement and the public had undeniable proof of a nationwide mafia network.
It was like catching Bigfoot, except Bigfoot had a cigar, a Cadillac, and a criminal empire.
Just the thought of all these men in like expensive suits and shoes just running into the woods is hilarious to me.
You gotta imagine some person like living down the road, looking out their window, enjoying their cup of coffee, and they see some dude in a pinstripe suit go running by. I'd be like, did I see that? I should probably put the coffee down.
Did I mix my cocaine with my coffee this morning? The aftermath of this was that the FBI was forced to acknowledge that the mafia had begun serious issues, and investigations under Hoover's leadership began. I messed that up horribly. It's okay. You'll understand. The mob was in its prime. Rich, respected, and seemingly untouchable. Vegas glittered. The unions paid out, and politicians looked the other way.
But every empire has its peak and a fall. Next up, we walk into the 70s, where the mob gets bold, messy, and hunted by the feds.
I promise, guys, we're fine. It is 8 o'clock at night, and we are hitting the end of our day. So, let's next move into the mob's golden age and the beginning of the decline. Like he said, the 1970s through the 80s, where wiretaps witnesses and the beginning of the end starts. By the early 1970s, the American Mafia was at the height of its power. It controlled unions, shipping ports, garbage collection, construction, casinos, loan sharking, extortion, and narcotics distribution, etc., etc. I almost did it again. Politicians, celebrities, and law enforcement often turned a blind eye or actively participated. Movies like The Godfather in 1972 romanticized the mob, further entrenching its mythos in American culture. The mob wasn't just in the shadows. It was in your movies, your neighborhood, your paycheck, and for many it was the American dream with blood on the floor.
Trivia bite. Some real-life mobsters were so impressed with The Godfather that they began quoting it and using it as a guide for business and behavior.
What could go wrong?
Rico changes the game. The real turning point in the fight against organized crime came in 1970 with the passage of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, better known as RICO. This law allowed prosecutors to charge mob bosses with crimes their underlings committed, and if they could prove the boss ordered or benefited from it. Treat the mob like a criminal enterprise, not just as a collection of disconnected crimes, and seize assets from criminal organizations. With RICO, the feds didn't need to catch a boss with a gun. They just needed to prove he ran away with the guy who pulled the trigger.
So I do want to add right here. Did you know that Sheen got RICO'd?
Who?
Sheen. So Sheen, for those who might not know, and apparently my amazing boyfriend here, Sheen is a company.
Oh, that Chinese scam website?
It's not a scam. Okay, it is kind of a scam.
Buying it straight from China, it's a scam.
Sure. Anyways, they got RICO'd in the last few years. And a lot of people thought they were, like, it was just a falsehood of the America people trying to take down a company that was fucking with their shit. Again, excuse my language. Anyways, they got RICO'd, and the RICO stood. Apparently, little man over here does not think they should have. Anyways, I'm not really sure what happened after they got RICO'd, but yeah, that was the first RICO case I have seen in a very long time. Have you heard of any other companies in your very short existence that have also gotten RICO'd?
No.
They don't really talk about it. So, funny enough, it happens a lot more than you think it does, but nobody ever talks about it. Ever. It is one of the hidden nuances of the media for some reason, and I don't understand why. But I just wanted to put that out there.
How interesting could you make the same story every time?
You got me there. I just think it's interesting that places are still getting RICO'd. So a key moment is that RICO let the government go after the brains, not just the muscle. It was a slow burn, but deadly effective. Excuse me. In the 1970s and 80s, the FBI began placing wiretaps in key locations, including mob hangouts, social clubs, restaurants, and phones. I don't know how you would not wiretap a phone. I mean, that's kind of the basis of the thing here, but one of the most famous examples is the FBI bugged the Ravenite Social Club in Little Italy, a key meeting spot for John Gotti and the Gambino family. The recordings eventually helped take down top leadership. The Mafia's love of loyalty and long conversations, turns out it made for great evidence. So, of course, now we go into turncoats and witness protection. Perhaps the biggest blow to the mob came from within. Facing decades-long sentences under RICO, some mafiosi began flipping, testifying against their former brothers in exchange for lighter sentences and federal protection. Some notable examples are Joe Valachi in 1963, the first to publicly confirm the mafia's existence and structure, and then Sammy, the Bull Gravano, Gotti's underboss, whose testimony helped convict the Teflon Don. The witness protection program was expanded, and dozens of mobsters disappeared into new lives with new names.
Omerta, the code of silence was cracking, and once that happened, the mob was bleeding from the inside.
So, now we're going to look into the fall and how the modern legacy of the mob is. From Bugsy Siegel's Vegas vision to John Gotti's swagger, the mob had lived like kings, but the spotlight became too hot to handle.
Next, the trials, the takedowns, and what's left of the American Mafia today.
So, from underworld kings to ghosts in the system, the 1980s and the 1990s were devastating for the Mafia. One by one, the high-profile leaders were brought down. Paul Castellano, boss of the Gambino family, was assassinated in 1985 outside Sparks Steakhouse in a hit orchestrated by John Gotti. John Gotti, the Dapper Don, became a celebrity, but that fame made him a target. He was finally convicted in 1992 after his underboss, Sammy Gravano, testified against him. Entire families were gutted by indictments. The Genovese, the Lucis, the Colombo, and Bonanno families all lost key leadership. When Gotti went down, it was more than a fall of a man. It was the fall of an era.
Fast fact, by the late 90s, more than 1,000 mobsters have been convicted under RICO statutes. The internal decline. Beyond law enforcement pressure, the mob suffered from within. Generational shifts. Younger members lacked the loyalty or discipline of their predecessors. Loss of territory as legitimate corporations took over construction, shipping, and even casinos. Cultural shifts. Loyalty to La Cosa Nostra no longer had the same appeal in the 21st century. When the money dried up and the codes got weaker, the whole thing started to rot from the inside.
So, is the American mob gone? Well, not entirely, but it is a ghost of its former self. The five families still exist, but with greatly reduced influence. They focus more on low-risk, high-reward scams, credit card fraud, cybercrime, gambling rings. Their street presence is minimal. No more flashy suits, no more Ravenite social clubs, and law enforcement remains vigilant. But today's priority is often on transitional gangs and cartels. The mafia never died. It just shrank back into the shadows where it started. A little bit of trivia here is that in recent years, authorities have busted low-level mafia activity involving sports, betting, counterfeit goods, and even art theft. But the days of dominating cities are over. So let's look at the names that built and broke the mafia. You can't talk about the mafia without talking about the men who made it larger than life. These aren't just mobsters, they're legends, myths, and cautionary tales.
Let's take a closer look at the most notorious names in the American mob: the good, the bad, and the blood-soaked.
So a lot of these we're already going to have been heard about a little bit, but we're going to go a little bit deeper into some of these. First one is Charles Lucky Luciano. Known as the father of modern organized crime in America, he created the commission, the governing body for the mafia's 5 families. He was instrumental in turning the mafia into a national syndicate, moving it away from traditional Sicilian hierarchies, and was imprisoned in 1936, but later released and deported to Italy in exchange for wartime assistance in Operation Underworld. Here's a quote attributed to him: "There's no such thing as good money or bad money. There's just money."
Number 2, Al Scarface Capone. I think everybody knows who Al Capone is.
Mm-hmm.
He was Chicago's most infamous mob boss during Prohibition. He made millions through bootlegging, gambling, and protection rackets. Was known for his violent enforcement and flamboyant public persona. And he was convicted in 1931 not for murder or racketeering, but tax evasion.
Yeah, she.
He was, if you didn't know, sent to Alcatraz, where he spent a lot of his time. And the guard just treated him with respect. A lot of the other inmates treated him with respect. He kind of was able to do his own thing, and I wouldn't say get away with it, but they obviously kept a close eye on him.
He lived a very cushy life there, I feel.
Yeah, and then towards the end of his life, his mind started. He started losing his mind.
Yeah.
So he, if I remember correctly, he lived out the rest of his days in one of his mansions in Florida.
Lucky. All right. Cool. Capone was the blueprint for the American gangster, flashy, ruthless, and larger than life. Next, we'll go over Meyer Linsky, the mob's accountant and one of the most financially savvy gangsters. Helped create the National Crime Syndicate, with Luciano, major force behind the financing and construction of mob-run casinos in Las Vegas and Havana, Cuba. And despite decades of investigation, Lansky died of an old age, never spending not even one day in prison.
He was the brain behind the brawn and one of the few to make it out clean. Frank Costello, known as the Prime Minister of the Underworld, bridged the worlds of organized crime and high society, ran much of New York's gambling operations in the mid-20th century, and he survived an assassination attempt in 1957 and then quietly stepped down from leadership. Trivia: his voice and mannerisms partially inspired Marlon Brando's portrayal of Don Vito Corleone in The Godfather.
Makes sense. Next, we have Vito Genovese, ruthless and power-hungry boss who wrestled control of the Luciano family, which was renamed the Genovese family. He attempted to consolidate national mafia power, but was undone by legal trouble and betrayal from within, and died in prison in 1969.
John Gotti, the Dapper Don, famous for his sharp suits, slick back hair, and defiance of the law.
His nickname is my favorite.
Head of the Gambino family during the 80s, became a media icon due to multiple acquittals, earning the name the Teflon Don. Finally convicted in 92 thanks to the testimony of his underboss, Sammy the Bull Gravano.
Gotti was the last of the celebrity gangsters. Cameras loved him. Juries not so much by the end. Next we have Sam
Giancana.
Sure, what you said. He was a Chicago outfit boss with rumored ties to the CIA, allegedly involved in plots to assassinate Fidel Castro, and found murdered in his kitchen in 1975 just before testifying before Congress.
Mobsters and Spies, a crossover episode no one saw coming.
These were the men who built empires from blood and business, and whose names still echo in everything from films to FBI files.
But even the biggest names eventually fall, taken down by the law, rivals, or their own ambition.
Next, let's look at the women of the mafia, the matriarchs, messengers, and mob wives who shaped the shadows.
The mafia may have been a man's world, but behind nearly every mobster was a woman with more power than you'd think, or more secrets than she'd ever say.
Whether they were loyal wives, silent accomplices, or brave informants, these women shaped the story just as much as the Dons did. Let's first look at Virginia Hill, the mob's money mule. A courier and mistress to mobster Bugsy Siegel. Known for her glamour and savvy, she moved large sums of money across state lines for the Chicago outfit. She was with Siegel when he was gunned down in 1947 in Beverly Hills, though she wasn't at the scene, and later testified before the Kefauver hearings on organized crime. Trivia here, Virginia once said of Siegel, he was the kindest man I ever knew until he got mad.
And for 2, we have Arlene Brickman, mob girl turned informant. She grew up idolizing mafia women and became entangled with New York mobsters, eventually turned informant to the FBI after her daughter was threatened. Her testimony helped convict several members of the Colombo crime family, and her life inspired the 1992 book Mob Girl and is currently in development as a film.
Ooh. She knew the lifestyle inside and out, and when it turned on her, she turned on it. Next, we'll look at Griselda Blanco, the Black Widow, not a mafia member, but a relevant counterpart. Though more associated with the Colombian drug cartels, Blanco operated in Miami and New York in the 1970s and 80s. She was one of the most powerful and violent figures in drug trafficking history, ordering hits with impunity and controlling a multi-million-dollar empire. Her ruthlessness earned her comparisons to the male mafia bosses.
She wasn't part of the 5 families. She built her own kingdom, and it was soaked in blood. Karen Gravano, mob daughter of Sammy the Bull Gravano, gained notoriety through the VH1 show Mob Wives and wrote a memoir about her life in and around the mafia, offering rare insight into what it's like to grow up in a world of secrecy, violence, and sudden disappearances. A quote from her was, "I was born into the life. I didn't choose it, but I still have to live with it."
I wasn't born into the thug life. The thug life chose me.
Okay.
Linda Shiro, witness to murder. Longtime partner of Gregory Scarpa Sr., a Colombo hitman and FBI informant. In 1994, she testified that Scarpa murdered people in front of her and even made her clean up the crime scenes. Her story revealed the horrifying domestic side of mob life, where violence didn't stop at the doorstep. Mob life for women wasn't always diamonds and dinner parties. Sometimes it was blood on the carpet and silence at the table.
Whether keeping the family secrets or risking their lives to reveal them, these women were never just bystanders.
Their stories remind us that the mob wasn't just about the power of men. It was about the power of fear, loyalty, and survival. And some of the bravest or boldest voices didn't come from behind a gun. They came from behind the scenes.
From bootlegging and back alleys of Prohibition to running Vegas and the unions, the mob left a permanent mark on American history.
It was part myth, part monster, and at its height it was untouchable, but greed, betrayal, and good old-fashioned justice eventually caught up.
And now it lives on in stories, movies, legends, and podcasts like this one.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the underworld. Stick around because next time we're cracking open another twisted chapter of human history.
Thanks for wandering through history with us on the Echoes of the Past.
If you liked what you heard, subscribe, rate us, and tell that one friend who still quotes fun facts at parties.
And remember, history may repeat itself,
but we promise not to.
See you in the next Echo.